So commonalities amongst the blue zones. So in other words, amongst the people who are living the longest, number one, they had a sense of purpose. Every morning they had a reason to wake up, right? This was true also for my grandparents. Like I said, my grandfather got up. His purpose was to go write his column, deliver the newspapers. My grandmother, her purpose was a little different. She had already retired, but volunteering gives you a sense of purpose. In Loma Linda, that was one of the biggest senses of purpose, was volunteer efforts through their church. So my grandmother would volunteer all the time. She had a church community that she would volunteer with. She went to Friends of the Library and volunteered. So she was very vibrant and active in that category. Does the same hold true for your relatives, Joel, who are near 100?
Yeah, absolutely. Mom, after my dad passed away, I think mom ended up being in almost 20 volunteer organizations. I mean, her daily calendar was way fuller than mine,
Wow.
and and I mean, she was just in every kind of local volunteer organization, and even up into her 90s. I mean, she was driving. She didn't stop driving until she was 97. And so, at 94, 95, 96, she was in a group called, I can't help but share this because it's so funny. She was in a group called, what do they call themselves? Anyway, they sang old hymns, happy notes, happy notes. That's what they were, happy notes.
Oh, I
Uh,
love that.
and so they would sing it at these so it was a bunch of retirees, and they sang really really well. They were good, and they would sing at nursing homes, around nursing home retirement centers. And so she would pop in. Here she is, 93, 94, 95. She pops into the house and says, well, we're going to sing to the old folks. And she was 94, 95, and most of the people she was singing for were younger than she was. And she said, we're going to sing to the old folks. And so that was just a normal for her.
I love that because that piggybacks on one of the categories of commonalities of blue zones. It's not just a sense of purpose, but it is like kind of your perception of life, right? Your outlook on life. And there your mom is not even clumping herself with like the old folks, quote unquote, like that. She didn't view herself that way. And I think that's so important, right? The way that you view yourself, not only your role in society, but even your place in getting older. Like I don't view myself as getting older
Mm.
because I feel happier and healthier than ever before in my life. So, so
Yeah,
so I
well,
don't ever think of that.
yeah, I've been blessed to know of several centenarians. Another one was my wife Teresa's grandmother, who lived to 106 months, and then she had an she also had a sister who lived to 102. But for we call it, Grandma Mason Cup, Teresa's grandmother. Um, I think this one really goes along with her. This perception of life. She was kind of opposite my mother. My mother was going, going, going. Grandma Mason Cup. Her thing was that her perception of life, she was just content. She was content. She could find happiness in going and sitting by the garden watching butterflies all day. And so her perception of life was not, I've got to be busy, 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 or I've got this, that, and the other kind of requirements for me. It was just contentment in life, contentment in the situation. And that always just really, really struck me, how she was able to be that satisfied, easily satisfied and content
Mhm.
in situation.
Yeah, it's like she found inner peace,
Yeah, yeah.
which is an important quality for living long and well. uh, so the next commonality among the longest lived people was the majority of them belonged to a faith-based community. So not only did they belong to a faith-based community, they made a point to say that they showed up and they engaged in the community, right? They were active members of that community. Now, this is true for both my grandparents, right? They both went to church, at least once a week, and they engaged in church activities. And my grandma would take us to church after school and whatnot. So faith was definitely an integral part of their lifestyle. Was it true for your mom
Oh,
and
yeah,
Teresa's?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, grandma, was faithful at church attendance, and she had her little tithe box on the mantle, and mom, mom wrote to missionaries, and she was very engaged in the local church as well. Yeah, they were both women of great faith and engagement in that perspective. Yes.
Oh, so far then we are agreeing with the
Yeah.
outcome of this documentary. But
Yeah, very much so. Very much
yes.
so.
Okay, well now let's see as we keep moving forward. Do we disagree or are we challenging? Okay, so the next commonality amongst the blue zone is they moved naturally. So I thought this was interesting. It was common sense, but it was kind of like, all of a sudden someone said it a little bit differently and it clicked a different way in my mind. So the people who are living the longest, they're not exercising like we do for the most part in the United States, where we're like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to go lift weights, or I'm going to go out for a run. Like they did not do things like that. They didn't carve out these specific times to go exercise. Instead, they moved naturally throughout the day. So they moved more than we do, and it was spread out throughout the day. So, for instance, they would walk to work or ride their bike to work. They would walk to church. They would walk to friends' houses, to various people who they would visit. They said that most of them didn't have machines to help them with housework or yard work. So, like the centenarian I mentioned, who would cut the grass with a machete, right? They would chop wood. They would grow their own food. So they were outside gardening, right? Which also gives them access to more sunlight, but that's another topic. They would prepare their food differently than we do as well, which is also requiring movement. So they might mill the corn with a crank, right? Manually crank it instead of plugging in the mill, to the power outlet.
Yeah.
So they were assessed, the researchers assessed that they were more active than we are, and they were much more active than if they were, say, going to the gym. And also, it was their concept of it. So in America, we typically think of suffering when we think of exercise, right? Like, no, you hear the terms, no pain, no gain, right? You just push through it. And so it's like a miserable thing that we have on our to-do list that we don't look forward to. But for them, physical activity was actually joyful, right?
Yeah, the Marines have a saying, pain is weakness leaving the body.
Yeah.
That's their thing. And yeah, I love this, Sina, because what it means is being a couch potato, but then getting up and going to do your half-hour workout at the gym is not nearly as good as just a lifestyle of movement where you're just naturally um, uh, moving because it's part of your, it's part of your life.
Exactly. And this ties into the community aspect because one of the ways that people in these blue zones are moving naturally is through dance and celebration. So this blends in a few categories. So what they were saying was that
So is
like
is this a new category?
so this is gonna encompass three categories: natural
Okay.
movement, community, and how they de-stress. All right. So what they said was these people who are living the longest, they experience stress, just like we're experiencing stress, right? So you can't avoid stress. And stress by itself is not a bad thing, right? It gets a bad rap in our culture, but it is
Mhm.
not a bad thing. Stress is required to help you adapt, to grow, to build your resilience, right? Like when we think of moving our bodies around, well, the typical example of exercise, that's providing a stress on your body. So even dance is providing a stress on your body so you adapt and get stronger, right? So stress by itself isn't a bad thing. It's how you handle the stress, how you can manage the stress. And so this is one of the differences between us and these people who live longer than us, is that their stress is more of local stress. So for instance, if somebody is having a problem with herding their flock, right? A problem came up, they're stressed about it. but they're able to remedy the problem. So they solve it. And so what happens is they complete that stress cycle within their body, right? Stress elicits the cycle. We've talked about this before on the program with rewiring your nervous system, how most of us go into fight or flight, we can't complete the cycle and then to get back into parasympathetic state, and we stay in this activated heightened state of stress, right? So they don't do that. They have these localized problems that they're managing, and once they successfully complete the problem, like solve the problem, they let the stress go. That's different than our stress, where they're saying a lot of ours comes from this 24-hour news cycle and this bombardment with social media, which these all have a heaviness or a negativity to them, or at least a leaning towards negativity. And those are all things that we can't solve by ourselves. So we're exposing ourselves to all these problems that we don't really have control over. And so we can't complete that stress response cycle. Whereas these people who are living longer, they're deplugged for the most part from all of these more external stresses. They handle the ones that are right in front of them, they complete them, and they have that sense of accomplishment, and they can let the stress go. This is very different than what we do in our culture.
Right. Well, and it's totally parallel with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is of course an iconic, a business self-improvement book. And one of the habits is stay within your sphere of influence. And his whole point there is when you go outside your sphere of influence and take on burdens and whatever stress of things that you can't do anything about, you end up actually shrinking your sphere of influence. And so if you think about the things that people get angry, frustrated, or stressed about today, 90% of it is stuff that you can't do anything about. So, people come to me and say, aren't you stressed about the Federal Reserve, the interest rates? You know what? There's nothing in the world that I can do tomorrow that'll affect Janet Yellen, and what she's doing at the Federal Reserve. But you know what? I can really affect whether my cows are healthy, whether my garden has tomato plants in it, and so I share this. I don't know if I'm gonna live long or not, but I certainly appreciate, and in my own life, just the living close and in the moment, and not carrying the weight and the burden of all these things that are outside of our control. Man, that's a wonderful point.
Thank you for joining us on Beyond Labels. Our mission with this podcast is to make it accessible to everyone.
But we are behind a paywall because the issues we discuss are often subject to censorship. We've run into that, and so we have an extremely modest paywall to let us have the freedom to discuss the kind of issues we want to discuss in the way we want to discuss them. And you can become a member and enjoy all this content by clicking on the description box below. We look forward to having you join our family.